Fellas, the plan is simple. You guys might have seen from the last video that I have picked up this deck, Endymion, or just Endymion Pendulum. This is one of the coolest decks that I've ever had the pleasure of playing, and it's mainly because this is my first time playing a real Pendulum deck. Prior to this deck, I have literally never played like an actual Pendulum deck where you actually need to be managing resources and in a meaningful way, and this deck really taught me that. I spent a ton of time trying to learn the ins and outs of this deck, and I want to share this deck with you. So I'm going to give you guys a brief history about what this deck did, a little bit of a card by card discussion in a deck profile, some tech choices you can slap in there, and of course some of that sweet gameplay. So let's get right into it.
Pendulum is not the best deck right now, because Pendulum is the best deck of all time, baby! And best deck! Let's go! That's the meta! Trash ass meta! And best deck, get out of my face!
There are a lot of mechanics in Yu-Gi-Oh that have come and gone, but two extreme standouts include spell counters, reminiscent of an attempted forced playstyle hoisted onto Yugi's legacy support, and pendulums, a mechanic so fundamentally broken that every time it's ever been relevant, it's been tier 0. The modern day Endymion is a combination of these two concepts. Originally released way back in 2009 in a structure deck, the Endymion structure deck was basically an archetype of monsters based around spell counters and powerful effects that you could trigger once you had enough of them, stuff such as free specials and spot removal. However, you may notice a fundamental issue of these cards. They're shit. They were way too high investment and way too slow to do anything of real value, even all the way back in 2009. So they were soon forgotten to the annals of history and remained that way until April of 2019, where the Order of the Spellcaster structure deck was released alongside a massive slew of pendulum support and spell counter support, which included free specials from deck, searches that added spell counters, board wipes, and negation. Basically, you have the Mighty Master himself and his 3 students, Servant, Reflection, and Magister. The students' most impactful effects are their pendulum effects. Their first pendulum effect is shared among them. Each time a spell card is activated, place 1 spell counter on this card when that spell resolves. Additionally, they also include an effect to special themselves in another monster that you can place spell counters on from a specific location based on the card. Servant specials from deck, Reflection from hand, and Magister from the face-up extra deck. Although Endymion was never a tier 1 threat, it was an extremely powerful tier 2, tier 1.5 option, especially when you consider the fact that Electromite was still legal at the time. Unfortunately, Konami did take Electromite outside of the shed and shot it in the back of the head, but we still have the remnants of what could have been thanks to Master Duel. Using our Endymion support alongside the mythical beasts who have synergy with the Endymions, being that we're able to actually place spell counters onto them, making them all valid summons off of our students, we are able to play the equivalent of an extremely powerful combo-based build-a-board strategy, able to set up 5 to 7 negates, sometimes even 8, or we could play 2022 Beatdown, where we're basically using Endymion and Jackal King as big booties to OTK our opponent. So let's get right into the card by card. Note, there are a lot of effects in here, but I'll try and break it down to be digestible. We've got 3 Magister of Endymion. Its pendulum effect lets you special summon from the extra deck face up, as well as itself, of course, and while it's on the board as a quick effect, you can remove 3 spell counters to special summon something from your deck that can hold spell counters, of course. This is really good in case something like your Endymion or Jackal King ends up getting removed due to something like a Kaiju. Just a really nice card to stick onto the board overall. Servant of Endymion, its pendulum effect is broken. You could special summon from the deck, and its on-field effect is irrelevant, so don't worry about it. Reflection of Endymion, it sucks, but we need a name. Each time a spell card is activated, blah blah blah, you get the idea. It special summons from the hand. And its on-board effect is that if it's spot summoned, you could target a spell counter card you control, as well as a card in your opponent's field, bounce both, and put these spell counters onto the reflection. Again, it's spot removal, but it's not always going to be going off. And usually you're going to be using your spot removal in the form of this bad boy himself, Endymion, the Mighty Master of Magic. Its pendulum effect is that you can remove 6 spell counters from your field, special summon this card from your pen zone, then count the number of cards you control that can have a spell counter, then destroy up to that many cards on the field. This does not target, by the way, and if you do place spell counters on this card equal to the number of cards destroyed, that is a hard once per turn. This pendulum effect is literally what will win you matches sometimes. This is so broken, just being able to clear out your entire opponent's board and they just do not get a response. because they're bad and didn't negate this for some reason. And its monster effect, it's a lot as well. Once per turn, not a hard once per turn by the way. When a spell, trap is activated or effect is activated, as a quick effect, you return one card you control with a spell counter to the hand, and if you do, negate the activation. If you do, destroy it. Then you can place the same number of spell counters on this card, being the Endymion, that the monster or card that you return to the hand had. So if you bounce something that had 3 spell counters, you put 3 spell counters on Endymion. Additionally, if it has spell counters, it can't be targeted and it can't be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. You know, same protection Dragoon has, and that card's banned. Anyways, when this card with a spell counter is destroyed by battle, you know, not once per turn by the way, you can add one normal spell from your deck to your hand. Yeah, any normal spell. But usually you're going to be grabbing Spell Power Mastery just in order to fix your hand, and also because it's broken. For our Mythical Beast, we're playing 3 Mythical Beasts: Jackal King, the Dog, which is a monster negate that's not once per turn, and generates spell counters like it's nobody's business. And we've got 3 Mythical Beasts: Master Cerberus. This searches the Jackal King and basically can help you just get a free body onto the board, being that Mythical Beast Cerberus pop itself, grab Jackal, Jackal pop itself, summon the Cerberus, and you're able to just get the free body for Pendulum plays later on. But Cerberus also acts as just an incredible removal option due to its on-board effect, just being able to target a card, target a monster, banish it, gain attack, go for big OTK plays, punch your opponent really hard. Just really nice stuff coming out from that. And finally, we've got Astrograph Sorcerer, because we were playing Electromite and this card is nuts. We're playing a bunch of draw cards. We're playing 3 Upstart Goblin, 3 Into the Void, and 3 Pot of Desires. You kind of need to play a ton of draw cards just because of how this deck's math shapes up, of how many draw cards, how many spell counters you want to stack onto your board as fast as possible. For consistency, of course, we're playing the 1 Terraforming and 3 Magical Citadel of Endymion. This card is nuts. It has the same effect as all the Pendulums have, where you just put a spell counter every time you activate and resolve a spell card, but the most broken effect is once per turn. If you would activate a card effect by removing spell counters from a card you would control, you can remove that many spell counters from this card instead. So let's say you have 3 counters on Citadel and you want to use Servant. Instead of needing to use the counters on Servant itself, you could just remove counters from the Citadel. This is really good in scenarios where you just sort of need additional spell counters. You just need that little bit of extension that this card just offers. It's absolutely incredible. We are playing 3 Spell or Power Mastery. This is Rhoda and just puts a spell counter on whatever you want. It's broken. I don't think I need to explain that. You're usually going to be grabbing your Servant of Endymion and 3 Mythical Institution. This card is a little bit of a doozy, but we're going to try and break it down. Each time a face-up Mythical Beast Pendulum monster card you control is destroyed by battle or card effect, place 2 spell counters on this card. That is not once per turn, and yes, destroying Cerberus with its own effect and destroy Jackal King with its own effect does count. Next, you can remove any number of spell counters from your field once per turn, add 1 monster from your deck to your hand, or face-up extra deck to your hand with a level equal to the number removed that you can place a spell counter on. So let's say you remove 3 counters from your board, you could add any level 3 from your deck or extra deck face-up. And yeah, that is not a hard once per turn. This shit is nuts. Usually you're going to be using it to grab maybe like an Endymion. If you have a ton of counters, you could even go for the big Endymion rather than like a Servant or like a Magister. Is just really, really nice overall. It can even grab the Mythical Beast, which is, you know, broken. And we're just playing 2 Called by the Grave because A, it's a spell, and B, we hate hand traps. On to our extra deck. Wow, this took way too long. We've got 1 Odd Eyes Vortex Dragon and the 1 Odd Eyes Absolute Dragon. You could technically make it by using Endymions and Reflections, but again, those hands are pretty few and far in between because they're pretty high rolly. But again, they're just nice to have as an option. We're playing 1 Heavy Metal Foes Electromite. I don't think I need to explain why we're playing this card. It's just absolutely broken. Draw a card, get Astrograph Sorcerer, add back, does everything. 1 Nightmare Phoenix, 1 Nightmare Cerberus, 1 Daybreaker the Shining Warrior. This card's a little bit cope, but I guess if you really need the zones and you really need the spell counters, it's okay. It also does act as like a spot removal option because of its second effect. Again, this card is like very cope. 1 IP Masquerena, 1 Decode Talker, and 1 Dingirsu. Yeah, these should not be in here, but they could just be any monster. You'll notice that our extra deck is very, very flexible outside of like exactly maybe like 7 to 10 cards. I just literally didn't have any better targets, but there are a ton of targets that we're going to go over in the tech section. But these are just like the most generic that I could come up with when I was building this deck. Yeah, Decode Talker just kind of has nice arrows, and Nigirisu is a removal option, so that's neat, I guess. 1 Nightmare Unicorn to go off into IP and just for general link climb plays. 2 Celine, you do only really need 1, but the second one is really nice to have in case you use the first one as sort of a pendulum summon for a 3, and the second one is just, you know, again, if you need the board building potential. Additionally, it can special summon for the hand or graveyard. You'll notice that pendulum monsters go to the extra deck face up, so how do we get them into the graveyard? The most common answer is something like Odd Eyes Absolute Dragon, where the materials end up going to the graveyard. So we could revive like an Endymion back, which is pretty neat. Borrelsword Dragon, just because pack filler, blah, 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 blah. Appaloosa is really, really good in this deck, being that we're able to link off our small students as well as our Electromite into Appaloosa. We could also link off maybe like a Celine and Odd Eyes Absolute into our Appaloosa for a 2-mat, as well as to get the Vortex onto the board. And of course, Access Code Talker, because it's broken and OTKs are really, really nice. So let's get into the card by card. In the tech slots, let's go take a look at some of those. So here are a couple of tech options that you could slot into your main and or side. We got Mythical Beast Jackal, who's a pretty funny normal summon, being that he's able to grab any mythical beast from your deck, except, you know, itself, obviously, but why would you want to do that? That's terrible. You could obviously grab something like Jackal King just to set up another monster gate, which is pretty nice. Mythical Beast Garuda is really funny. If your opponent special summons or normal summons a monster, you can remove these spell counters, special summon this card from your hand, and then bounce that monster. It's basically Compulse the hand trap. It's really funny. Magician's Souls is a foolish burial as well as a free summon, as well as it's a cycler for dead cards. So stuff like the second spell power mastery and already used up Magical Citadel, stuff like that is really neat for Magician's Souls. But I just found myself, I didn't really need it in most scenarios. It just kind of acted as like a body where I was just like, damn, I really wish this was an Upstart Goblin. Speaking of Upstart Goblin, we've got 3 Chicken Game. Again, this card is really difficult to justify crafting because it's just slightly worse Upstart, as well as the fact that it does have Nombos with the Magical Citadel. But Chicken Game, if you want more draw spells, this is a perfectly fine card that you can play. For extra deck options, I mentioned that most of the extra deck, it doesn't really matter, but if you want to play some cheeky options, we've got Mech Knight Crusadia Avermax in case you want to create basically a really unoutable dude, Borrelo Dragon if you want to steal stuff, and arguably the only one on this list that I've actually bothered playing is Blackluster Soldier, Soldier of Chaos. 3 monsters with different names, and if this Link summon monster was used, had materials as a level 7 or higher monsters as material, your opponent cannot target it with card effects, also it cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. Eldritch does not have an out to this card. If you make this card gain 1500 attack, it is literally unoutable by Eldritch. I don't think they have a real out to this card. It's actually insane. Yeah, Blackluster Soldier, Soldier of Chaos is honestly a win con in most scenarios. Just having this big booty that has such amazing protection against certain decks is actually just like, it's amazing, like shit. Alright, let's get on to the game. So, our match is going to be against Chaos Lightsworn, a really cool deck, which unfortunately we're going to have to beat into the ground because we need that sweet, sweet gameplay footage. We're going to scale Mythical Beast Master Cerberus, and we're going to pop it because there's nothing else in the other pen zone, and we're going to shotgun the Astrograph Sorcerer because I'm bad and didn't save it for the Jackal King, where we could have gotten a more impactful search. We're going to grab a Mythical Beast Master Cerberus from the deck. We're going to scale Jackal King, same conditions. We're going to pop it because nothing else in the other zone, and we're going to go through our Mythical Beast Master Cerberus from our extra deck. Because we still have the luxury to commit to extra deck plays, we're going to go for a very early Electromite to try and set up a large Pendulum summon. We're going to go for the Electromite, and we're going to send the Servant, because that's the only card we don't really have access to. We're going to Electromite pop the Master Cerberus in order to add the Servant back, and we're going to use Electromite in order to draw a card, and look what we found. A Jackal King. We're going to use Spell Power Mastery, we're going to add Magister for the low scale, and we're going to put the additional counter onto Servant. We're going to get 3 counters, and here is where we go for a passive Pendulum summon of 4. We're going to go Jackal King 1. We're going to go Astrograph for 2. We're going to go Jackal King for 3, or Endymion in this instance, and we're going to go the last Jackal King from hand. We're going to overlay 2 of them, because one of them is a level 7, did you know that? Into Odd Eyes Absolute Dragon. We're now going to be using the effect of Servant of Endymion in order to summon itself and an Endymion from deck, because we do want that, obviously. Who would have guessed that spell and trap negates are really broken? We're going to link 3 into Appaloosa, Bow of the Goddess, and because the Odd Eyes Absolute Dragon was sent to the graveyard, we are able to use it for an Odd Eyes Vortex Dragon, who is an Omni negate. We're now going to use the Desires right off the bat. We're going to get some counters onto the board, and we're going to pass it to our opponent. Our board is looking really nice. We've got 5 monster negates, 1 spell trap negate, and 1 Omni negate. They're going to Rhoda. We're going to let that go through. It is a Photon Thrasher, and we're going to get more spell counters. Get used to hearing that sound a lot. They're going to special with Photon Thrasher. They're going to Charge of the Light Grade to add Lumina. No way we're going to let that through later on. They're going to mill a Minerva, and they're going to mill a Revival Golem. That's pretty cute. We're going to negate that just because I hate it, and I don't want to lose to a stupid rank 4. And yeah, that's a pretty lucky mill, if I'm being honest. They're going to normal Starlead Safer to run over our Appaloosa, but that still doesn't really answer our board. They're going to, in the main phase 2, go for the one, the only Plan B Bagushka, the Terribly Tired Taper. And unfortunately for us, we can't really activate any of our effects. But as long as our monster isn't in defense mode, we are still able to use their effects. And what monsters can't be switched to defense mode? That's right, Link monsters. We're going to go into Nightmare Cerberus. Nightmare Cerberus is going to use its effect. We're going to pitch our Into the Void to pop the Bagushka. We're going to switch everything into attack. We're going to activate the Magical Citadel of Endymion. That's going to, I don't know, put spell counters on our board. We're going to link 3 into 1, 2, 3, Celine, the Queen of the Master Magicians. We're going to put a bunch of spell counters on that because, you know, we have a million spells engraved. We're going to scale Reflection, and we are going to PEND 5 before our opponent concedes, before we can even get the luxury of doing so. Very rude. So what did we learn today, class? The fact that Pendulum is basically the best deck of all time? Honestly, yeah. Let's get into the pros and cons. Pros. 1, it's consistent, kind of. Because of how the deck just naturally plays, the deck doesn't exactly open the same line or play every turn, so it's not consistent in that regard, but most hands are able to end on the same sort of boards. It's sort of like a puzzle of you trying to turn your hand into a particular end board based on a matchup or instinct. 2, it can play through certain types of interruption extremely well. Because of Jackal King's ability to turn off hand traps, Endymion's board wipe for back row, and the ability to just Pendulum summon out a couple of negates rather than commit to extra deck summons under a max C, this deck is great at playing through all sorts of boards that other decks are just simply unable to. And 3, this deck can OTK on a dime. It's kind of crazy, but most of your wins aren't going to come from locking your opponent out with like 7 negates, but through the battle phase of, and just being able to consistently put out big bodies turn after turn after turn. Now the cons. 1, this deck bricks in a very particular way. One of the issues with this deck is that although every card does basically the same thing, they do require certain other cards in order for them to function properly. Institution isn't going to be doing anything alongside Magister. Mighty Master doesn't synergize well with your draw spells. It's certain combos like these that can make playing the deck very frustrating at times, being that just missing one card can very wildly vary your plays. 2, it can play through negation relatively well, such as hand traps, but it crumples to disruption. Cards like Ashen and Perm basically will do nothing against you, but stuff like Ghost Ogre and Pankratops can massively screw up your plays. And 3, one of the main issues with Pendulum historically is that it's always been reliant on needing its scales, needing an additional 2 cards in your hand in order to get your explosive plays going. Even if you're not going for a PEND 5 or even going for a Pendulum summon at all, you do need to open hands that have a ton of draw cards and draw in a particular manner in order to activate your students. Pendulum is just a very resource hungry deck, and it can be disappointing to see that sometimes your plays are just limited to a Mighty Master pass just because that's how the deck will function sometimes. Overall, I think this deck is absolutely amazing. It is so high ceiling. Its boards are incredible. It has OTK. It can play through all sorts of boards, and I have just fallen in love with this deck. I'm going to be playing this deck for, honestly, a really long time. Thank you guys so much for watching. I've been Stevie Blunder. Be sure to hit the like button and subscribe and comment and all that good jazz. And that's going to be it for me. See ya.